Hello and welcome to 9th hackathon during the Open Data Day event that we have held here online in Zagreb. This is one of our workshops that we will have in English because of our guests. And also I would like to invite you, if you still haven't had a chance to look at our projects or join our hackathon teams, there is still time for today and for tomorrow. You can go on codeforcroatia.org and then you can just write us as an answer to the post. Everybody posted their ideas on Discourse Forum. So this is the way how you can get in touch with us and join on our projects. And now I want to introduce our guests from C4Ads that will hold this workshop for us. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Hi, Lana. Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Maria Strunjac. I'm an analyst at C4Ads, working primarily on organized crime and grand corruption. And I have with me today my colleague James, who works with us on our data team, and we'll be sharing with you a project that we've been working on called PEP Explorer, which is an international database for politically exposed persons across the Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and Western Balkans region. So James, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So first, to just give like a little bit of an overview about the project surrounding PEP Explorer. So PEP Explorer itself is a key component of an initiative we have at C4Ads that aims to better enable anti-corruption efforts by increasing transparency surrounding politicians' assets. And so for us, that's really kind of looking at asset declarations data and how to make that data better. So there are a couple different parts to this project. The first is building regional partnerships. So working with organizations across the Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and Western Balkans region who work with PEP data on a day-to-day basis to collaborate on efforts to increase transparency and identify unexplained wealth. The second kind of component of this initiative is identifying best practices for collecting, publishing, and structuring PEP data, and in many cases kind of developing tailored recommendations for jurisdictions based on their existing data environments, because in many cases, asset declarations can look pretty different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And then finally, the third component of this is building PEP Explorer itself. So creating a centralized PEP database that allows users to search across PEP data for multiple jurisdictions, which we hope will help bolster transparency and combat corruption. So you can move into the next slide. So what is PEP Explorer itself? As I already mentioned, it's an international PEP database, but what makes it unique? The two kind of words that we like to use when we talk about what sets PEP Explorer apart are regional and centralized. So PEP Explorer is, like I said, regional in the sense that it contains records collected from official asset declarations registries across 11 countries at the moment, which allows users to search for information across borders. It's also centralized in the sense that it's one of the first publicly available PEP databases to structure and house this data for the Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and Western Balkans region, all in one place, which both increases data access and enables more powerful data analysis. And our goal in doing all of this is to make it easier than ever to uncover politicians' unexplained wealth. James, you can move to the next slide. So to back up a little bit and give some context for how we kind of started this project, at the very beginning, before we started building the website itself, we started by identifying PEP data sources across the Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and Western Balkans region. We sometimes call it the E-Cube region for short. So we started by assessing 32 national PEP databases across the region and developing a scoring methodology to identify data gaps and compare data quality across countries. This scoring methodology relied on assessed data on two primary criteria. The first was how accessible the data was, so whether it was free to access, whether it required a registration, whether there was a bulk download function or an API access, things like that. And for those criteria, we primarily relied on standards that have already been outlined by organizations like the Open Knowledge Foundation and others. And then the second kind of component that we assessed these data sources based on was more specifically related to asset declarations data. So looking at which officials have to report their assets, is it public, judicial, and military officials? Do their family members have to report their assets? And then we also looked at like the kinds of assets that they have to report, things like that. And so for those criteria, we primarily relied on the FATF and EU PEP definitions. So once we scored all of these data sets, we did two things. The first was we created, on the left, you can see here, an interactive kind of data coverage map that lives on PEP Explorer's website, where you can actually go in and click on each individual country and see which PEP data sources exist or are publicly available. And you can compare their scores and see kind of how each country ranks. The second thing that we did was turn over many of these data sources to our data team for collection. So James, you can move to the next slide, which brings us to where we are now. So PEP Explorer currently has data sets for 11 jurisdictions integrated into the platform, and we're working on 6 additional ones at the moment. And then we have a couple others in the pipeline where it's maybe a little bit trickier to collect the data, but we're still sort of evaluating those data sources as well. And yeah, that's kind of currently where it stands in terms of data sources. We've also recently launched the beta testing phase of the platform and are continuing to receive feedback on its both its data and its user features. And so we're hoping to sort of continue to improve on those aspects of the platform as well. So that's kind of what we're working on in the like short to medium term. And then in the long term, we're hoping to also sort of expand into other regions as well. So potentially Western Europe or Latin America, to really make it as useful as a tool as it can possibly be. So that's kind of an overview about the project itself. I'll now hand things over to James, who will talk a little bit about our data collection process and then give a demo of the platform.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the technical implementation of this application. I thought it could be useful for folks from the Code to Croatia. We are at a hackathon after all. And then I'll be able to share the site as it stands now, give a little bit of a live demo, and maybe answer any questions. So really at the core of this project is it's a data aggregation tool, right? So data collection, management, standardization, and data enrichment, all those things that I would call the data pipeline are really the core of this project. So at the base of that is our methodology for collection. And if anyone has any really specific questions on how we do this, I'd be happy to answer. But the core of this project is really at a standardized reoccurring collection process, which is one of the first ones that we've overtaken at C4Ads. We do a lot of publicly available information gathering as part of our day-to-day work and across all our research portfolios. But this is one of the first times where we really were targeting a really specific class of data, that being data around politically exposed persons and their assets, and setting up a process in which targets can be collected from the open web on a uniform manner. It runs on a timer on sometimes a monthly, sometimes a quarterly basis, depending on data availability. And we structure all this data into a really uniform format. The data can be pretty big. We have several gigabytes of data that we're collecting regularly. So we leverage Amazon S3 for our storage capabilities and a lot of our processing. So, and also monitoring with a dashboard that sends alerts if anything is wrong. And then the second process of creating this website was that act of merging and standardizing. And a big part of this process also was where we started to do enrichment materials on the data as well. So you'll notice in a couple moments when I share the site, we've done some things to the underlying information that we've collected to make it more usable across all the data. So that's things like translation and transliteration. Transliteration being, of course, for those not familiar, that's converting something like Cyrillic to a Latin script. And translation, of course, is just converting the source language to right now just to English, but potentially to other languages in the future. And having all this data in really standardized format can open the door to doing things like summary statistics. If we get down the road and want to start looking at trends of income or aggregating wealth, if we ever get a way to quantify qualitative data, so what is a car or jewelry worth, that's something that we can potentially do now that it's all in a very standardized central location. And then, of course, the last step, as you might expect, is sending this data out to the user in a uniform output. Right now, we're just serving the data through the front end of our web application. It's a simple search bar, as I'll show you momentarily. But in the future, we're also looking at generating, sending this data in bulk via a programmatic API output. That's still a work in progress and doesn't quite exist yet. But for those of you taking part in the hackathon challenge using C4Ads data, you'll see really what the back end of our web data looks like. We've provided the Croatian cut of PEP data. Of course, that's sourced from one of Croatian's government portals. But if you find our data on this hackathon, you'll be able to see kind of what the data looks like in its most raw format. And hopefully any of you who are taking part will be able to analyze that in the way that we would. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to switch my screens here and we'll do a site demo of how the site currently stands. So give me one moment, please. All right, so this is PEP Explorer, the front page of the site, and it's our, as Maria was saying earlier, our search and discovery tool for politically exposed persons. And at its core, this is a pretty simple search engine to go over those centralized and standardized PEP data PEP data elements that we've been talking about. And we designed this application in a similar way to some of our other C4Ads applications. We're a small nonprofit in Washington, D.C., but we've started to dip our toes into software development. And this is our third kind of search engine-based application we've made. Another one that you can find on the open web is called Sanctions Explorer, which has a pretty similar, single search bar philosophy, except it focuses on sanctions data as opposed to politically exposed persons, and it aggregates sanctions data from the major sanction authorities across the world. So please check that out if you're also interested. But similar to that, PEP Explorer has its core utility in just free text search. So I'll start by doing a relatively simple search of this individual, Zoran Zaev. Some of you, oops. Actually, this is kind of an interesting. I misspelled his name, but you'll be able to see that I was still able to find this individual, and that's kind of due to the way that we start to add some functionality into the site. I didn't even do this on purpose, but all the searches that you run through PEP Explorer do kind of a base level of what we would call a fuzzy search. So you'll be able to get some slight name variations, which is really useful in names that have been like transliterated. Anyone who's ever maybe looked at Russian names, for example, you'll see that there's lots of different like spelling interpretations when you convert maybe a Cyrillic name back to its Latin equivalent, like Natalia or something like that with the Y or the I, for example. So here is kind of you start to see one of our initial attempts to make some utility in the search process with this individual. And the second thing I would just say is, of course, that you maybe already noticed the transliteration component of this. So the original data we collected is in this is Macedonian, but I searched it in its Latin script. So you'll still be able to get hits to the same individual. And alternatively, you can start to see, besides that transliteration component, we also have the translation components of the core pieces of data. So that's things like the role, president, organization, government of the Republic of North Macedonia. And if we click onto this profile, you'll begin to see, the core pieces of information about this individual. I will translate it again just to show what we've done. And that's things like incomes, in this case, not reflected, properties, real estate, immovable properties is things like automobiles generally, but also could be anything from artwork to jewelry, if reported, and also details of ownership of that information. And just something I would note is that you would not really be able to perform this search on Macedonian official declaration portal. That site, if you go visit it here, which we link to, it's merely just one table that paginates for some 100, 200 pages, and there's no search capability. So that's one of the core things that this site, even in its simple form, is providing. So let's see, I will move on to another example now. And we will search another individual. This time I'm going to copy and paste it so as to not misspell. This is Sinisha Mali. Any of you who are close followers of European corruption reporting might be familiar with him. The Minister of Finance in Serbia. And so let's see. Also, I'll show here, we have the capacity to, even though we know where this individual is most likely located, we could still filter by a country or by a role or by a year range prior to our search. And here we find this Serbian minister, again, in its English format. And clicking on this individual, this is just the time where I would probably start to show maybe some of the shortcomings or challenges that come with this type of project. Because as you maybe know from the reporting done in 2015, this Mr. Mali was implicated in a big corruption scandal in which he was using shell companies to buy some $6 million of apartments along Bulgaria's seacoast. And it was, he was using shell companies that came out in the big Panama Papers leak, and these weren't reported in his assets. And you'll see here kind of something that is similar to a lot of asset declaration data or really official reporting is that the data there, it's really pretty basic. It's never as much or as detailed as we would want it to be. If we look at Mr. Mali, for example, sometimes it'll say something just to the effect of, here we have, apartment 5 rooms, generally. No information about location, no information about value, date of purchase, etc. And I do appreciate some of the privacy concerns that a lot of countries hold up. However, it does make the challenge a little greater for investigators like ourselves to go and find specific examples of this type of actions. But you can see here on PEP Explorer, we do have the various years of Mr. Mali's declaration, of course, at every point linked back to the official Serbian asset itself. But yeah, that's just a kind of a way to show one of the big caveats of this application, which probably everyone is familiar with, is that a lot of this data is very self-reported. And so to that effect, we're not really guaranteeing its accuracy, or we're just collecting what we find without too much editorial discretion. All right, so now I'm going to pivot back to, we'll go back to, we're doing a Croatian hackathon from Zagreb. So let's start looking at some Croatian companies, I think. And one thing I will note here is that previously I've just searched a couple of people, but we could also search things like organizations or companies. So this is a company that I found in some searches Croatian company, Address Grupa. Probably maybe you know about it much more than I do. But the point being is that we're able to search this company not because it's the name of an individual or a name of a profile on our site, but because it appears in official asset declarations. So any text that you search here will be able to get a hit on individuals that reference it. In this specific case, I think publicly traded companies in Croatia, unless I'm mistaken, are ones that are represented here. But we can see some of these individuals that have investment shares in this particular organization. So some representatives from the parliament. And even if we were to want to filter by role, it could be interesting because here, if we were to filter by the role of, I believe, minister, we can try. Oops. Fuzzy search, but we'll get roles where members have that similar role as well as this text represented. And so clicking on this person, we can see where this is represented down here. It's in an affiliated organization. I will translate this Address Grupa, and with a shareholder value of some 13,000 crowns, I think is the currency. But also one thing I'll note is that where we get official documentation, official PDFs, Word documents, anything of original documentation, we also will include that here on PEP Explorer. So you could view this official declaration itself. You can also link back to the site, as I've mentioned previously. And if you're participating in the hackathon, you can also see this raw data and do some aggregated statistics yourself. So just to show another example of the organization search, here's a telecom company you may be familiar with. And I think what I was going to show was actually the filter of finding all parliament members who have a share in this particular telecom company. So if we filter by role of parliament, it doesn't have to be an exact match, but just contain the word parliament. We can find, these 4 members of the Croatian parliament. Maybe they're not all parliament members, but some different political parties, I believe. And viewing each of them, we can see their associated share in this organization. So potentially useful when that data is available, you are able to search it and find some leads in that capacity. All right, so that's a lot of search. The way anything that has text, you can search it. So even if you have if you want to try to search an address, you want to try to search a city, all that is possible in the search bar. Very simple. We leave it up to the user. And now I'll show you around a couple other tabs we've been developing in PEP Explorer so far. The first is this analytics page, and Maria was alluding to this earlier. This was a bit of a academic exercise on the part of C4Ads to survey the landscape of publicly available politically exposed persons information. And so we're thinking of making this page even better in the future in terms of like aggregated statistics and things of that nature. But currently it shows if one were investigating this type of data, we give on a given country where you would be able to find this type of information. So for example, in Ukraine, which has really nice asset anti-corruption organizations and transparency measures, particularly we're fond of the organization ANTAC, who've put together a publicly available PEP dashboard on API, which is sourced from official government declarations. And then there's another one here, even that sources from that same place as well. So that's an example of a country that has really worked to get high PEP availability cover, transparency measures, and publicly available information. But searching for the country like Belarus, we couldn't find anything. So if you do, let us know. But this is how we've been scoring these countries. Croatia, really nice high levels of transparency. And you can see the fields that we scored it on. Whether or not data contains handwritten text makes it very hard to parse out whether or not it includes information on the judicial members or state-owned enterprises. These are all ways that we scored coverage and availability. We did find some results where, even though we are looking for something like members of state-owned enterprise executives, less than half of the countries that we surveyed had that type of data available. So it is still a hard challenge, but this is a starting point we're at. And I think, besides this site, this data that we've collected has already proven really useful in a lot of different applications for our research, for our partners' research, and for hopefully research in the future. So that is, and then a little bit about next steps. The main next steps are what I mentioned, is working on that API endpoint so we can deliver that bulk raw data to investigators. And that's a way to do screening of assets against another data source. So for example, what we proposed in our hackathon challenge was the ability to take an external data source, like in this case, the Croatian property registry, and compare that against the data from PEP Explorer, which is persons data and asset reporting data. So with those two pieces of information at your hand, you might turn to a programmatic investigation using some flavor of code. And that's where it'd be really useful to have an API endpoint, which we're developing. And then the second thing is for the website itself, those aggregation statistics on things like income or assets. So yeah, that's where we're at right now. And we've been starting to give out some demo licenses. So if you're interested, we'd like to hear from you. And if any other features really stand out to you that you'd like, we'd be happy to hear about that. So with that, I will turn back to Maria. Anything else I missed or you want to add?
No, I think that covers everything. I think now would be a good time to kind of open things up for questions, if anyone has any questions about the platform.
Okay, thank you. We did receive some questions and comments, but maybe before we go to the question part, if you can tell us a little bit more about the data set that you sent for hackathon, and what are the possibilities to work on it, and how did you imagine it could be used?
Yeah, so I can talk about that. So the data that we provided for the hackathon is basically two types of data. So the first data that we provided is a really big data set on the Croatian, I'm not sure the word to use, maybe it'd be like, it's the cadastral map. So it's the place where parcels of land you can look up who owns the title of land parcels all around Croatia. And we have some, I don't even remember, like hundreds of thousands of parcels, as well as their associated owners and specific ownership data. So that's things like the owner's ID, the parcel number, in some cases the address, and then lots of details about what the land is used for, etc. But in every case, there's an owner's name attached to, and their share of the land value, and not the value, but their share of the land with that parcel code. So our proposed challenge is that one might try to pair that data set with various PEP lists. And so PEP lists, would essentially just be the names of politically exposed persons from various jurisdictions. So, you could start with Croatia. We have those Croatian officials, and they've declared real estate holdings in their official declarations. So, potential investigation would be to compare those official holdings to what the person declared. And here, we're pretty confident that this is a relatively strong encapsulation of of what data was out there on that cadastral map. So you could compare, if you find the names and all those real estate assets, compare if it's the same accuracy, or if there's anything that this individual was not reporting. I think would be an interesting investigation. And the second piece I would say is to take it from to not use Croatian politically exposed persons, but to use something like Russian politically exposed persons. We've also provided a Russian PEP list, and this is a way to find, foreign assets abroad. And this, if you're reading the news recently, this is a big push for lots of governments to do this type of work in terms of like sanctions enforcement, or in terms of, I don't know, I'm not the analyst, so I wouldn't speak too authoritatively. However, this is the type of work that we might do to identify unknown assets of a sanctioned individual. So could you find a Croatian property of, a member of the Russian Duma who might be sanctioned either now or soon? We've provided their names in a list, as well as affiliated roles. And it'd be relatively trivial to try to do a search across the Croatian real estate list and see if you can identify those properties and confirm if it is in fact owned by that individual. So where you go from there is up to you, but that's a similar workflow that we do at C4Ads all the time. And so I thought it'd be interesting to share with this hackathon. And so last thing I'll say is, besides, we've provided, so the PEP list from Croatia, Russia, and Hungary was the third one. So we've provided the names of several politically exposed persons from Hungary, whether that's business executives, I think family members as well, and politicians, of course. And so, yeah, it's a similar workflow. In that case, we just have names, but you could try your best to try to identify those assets just as part of an investigation. And then the bonus is, if you want to take the step of identifying the real estate assets, in the cases where there are addresses, it could be interesting in a nice visualization to just plot those on a map via like geocoding the addresses, or if it's available. But I don't think it's a uniform field, unfortunately. Yeah, so hopefully that all made sense. Maria, I think, will be doing it along with you as well. Anything you wanted to add to that, Maria?
No, I think you covered everything.
Okay, perfect. This sounds really interesting. And we also have some comments here on YouTube part. So Philip says, great work, James. These data sets are hard to integrate. I appreciate what you have done. Nice work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Then I have a question from the colleague. So one colleague was interested in how you got Croatian property data from, let me see how it's in English. So it is Državna geodetska uprava. It is State Geodetic Administration. So did you have to pay for any data of those?
No, we just were able to find a way where we could just pull the data right off the site. It was, took some effort and some difficulty, but yeah, I could share in more detail, but we were basically able to scale collection of that site itself.
Okay. And then we also have question: how does Croatian PEPs data look compared to similar data in other countries? Who is the best and who is the worst?
Croatian is one of the best. I mean, it's far better than, I would say almost better any country outside of places like Ukraine, where there's been formal anti-transparency organizations in the government who have really scaled out. So Ukraine is probably the best we've seen, where they took, every politician, every associated government member, and made all of their holdings and assets highly standardized and highly available in a public database. Croatia is really good in the sense of the data is really detailed and very dense, but it doesn't have that element of the available like programmatic database where you can go read and you can search really good data, but you can't take that next step of saying, okay, I have 1 million things to search here and I have 10,000 PEPs to search here. I need to leverage like some computer software to do that. You can't quite do that with Croatia, but the data that they do provide is really strong. So yeah, Ukraine's probably the best. Croatia in terms of coverage is about as good as it gets, but almost there.
Okay, yeah, we are trying to get there, hopefully one day.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So if you guys have any more questions, or if you would like to discuss anything further, you can always contact us, and our guests here will also be very glad to answer all of your questions even after this presentation. This was very interesting and very useful. We really do like the work that you are doing. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. And we will definitely stay in touch.
Great.
Yeah,
thank you very
so much for having us. And we're looking forward to working with you guys throughout the hackathon.
Yeah, okay. Thanks one more time, and see you soon.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.